every crime is a wound on the world. We're here to dissect it, layer by layer, to find the truth buried within. This is Anatomy of Crime. In the autumn of 1984, the city of The Dalles, Oregon, was a portrait of American pastoral life. It was a place defined by its geography and its history, nestled on the majestic southern bank of the Columbia River, where the Cascade Mountains begin their slow, green descent into the high arid plains of the east. It was a community of about 10,000 souls, built on the sturdy foundations of lumber, agriculture, aluminum, and the quiet, predictable rhythms of the seasons. Life here was measured and straightforward. The greatest civic anxieties revolved around the success of the cherry harvest, the outcome of the high school football game on a Friday night, and the persistent gossip that circulated over coffee at the local diner. It was a place that felt insulated, held safely in the amber of a bygone era, a world away from the grand, chaotic dramas of the wider world. In September of that year, however, an invisible enemy laid siege to the town, a silent, insidious sickness that respected no boundaries and followed no discernible logic, threatening to shatter the community's sense of security forever. It began without fanfare, as a scattered series of personal miseries. A local lawyer feels a sudden, sharp pang in his stomach after a business lunch. A mother of 3 is abruptly overcome by a wave of nausea while shopping for groceries. An elderly couple spends a night racked by fever and chills. Assuming they've caught a particularly nasty stomach flu, individually, these incidents were unremarkable. But they were not individual incidents. They were the leading edge of a biological assault. Within days, the scattered cases became a cluster, and the cluster exploded into an epidemic. The trickle of sick people into the Mid-Columbia Medical Center became a flood. The emergency room was inundated with patients suffering from a brutal and uniform set of symptoms: crippling abdominal cramps, vomiting, explosive and often bloody diarrhea, and fevers that spiked to 104-105 degrees. The town's medical infrastructure was pushed to the breaking point. Hospital staff worked frantically, moving from patient to patient, trying to manage symptoms and provide comfort. But they were fighting an enemy they could not see and could not identify. The sheer scale of the outbreak was terrifying. It wasn't confined to a single neighborhood picnic or a bad batch of potato salad from one church supper. This was different. The victims were young and old, rich and poor. They had eaten at different restaurants, shopped at different grocery stores, lived in different parts of town. The illness cut a wide, indiscriminate swath through the community, and the lack of a common thread was the most frightening part. Local health officials from the Wasco County Public Health Department were overwhelmed. Their first and most urgent fear was the water supply. A decade earlier, the town had suffered a major outbreak of giardiasis from contaminated water, and the memory was still fresh. They immediately began rigorous testing of the city's water, but every sample came back clean. The water was safe. The mystery deepened. Panic began to simmer beneath the surface of daily life. Parents kept their children home from school. Restaurants, once the hubs of social life, sat eerily empty. The local economy shuddered. Rumors flew. Was it a new, virulent strain of influenza? Was it some unknown environmental toxin leaking into the air from a nearby industrial plant? The uncertainty was a kind of psychological poison, seeding fear and suspicion throughout the town, with no answers and the number of sick climbing into the hundreds. Local authorities knew they were out of their depth. They made a call for help to the nation's foremost medical detectives. the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention in Atlanta. The CDC dispatched its elite epidemic intelligence service, a team of doctors and scientists who descended on the Dalles and began the painstaking work of unraveling the outbreak. They conducted hundreds of interviews, meticulously documenting every meal, every errand, every social contact of the afflicted. They took stool samples, blood samples, and food samples, creating a vast database of biological and behavioral information. Slowly, through the methodical grind of epidemiological science, a pattern began to emerge from the chaos. By cross-referencing the victim interviews, they identified a statistically significant connection. A disproportionate number of the sick had eaten at one of 10 specific local restaurants in the days before falling ill, and within those restaurants, the common denominator was not the steak or the soup or the sandwiches, it was the salad bars. Even with this breakthrough, the most logical assumption was a massive, coincidental failure in the food supply chain. Perhaps a single farm had distributed contaminated produce, or a sick food service worker at a distribution center had unknowingly spread the pathogen. The idea that someone had done this on purpose, that a human hand had deliberately laced the croutons and chickpeas with disease, was simply unthinkable. It was the stuff of spy novels and Cold War thrillers, not the reality of a quiet, cherry-growing town in Oregon. But the unthinkable was precisely what had happened. This was not an accident. This was not negligence. This was a calculated act of biological warfare. It was a field test, a rehearsal for a much larger attack designed by an enemy hiding in plain sight. Today, on Anatomy of Crime, we dissect the anatomy of a spiritual utopia's violent collision with American democracy. We will explore how a charismatic guru's quest for enlightenment in the Oregon desert devolved into a plot of mass poisoning, political ambition, and attempted murder. This is the story of Rajneeshpuram and the anatomy of a domestic bioterror plot designed to win an election by silencing a town. To truly comprehend how a spiritual movement dedicated to love and meditation came to poison hundreds of innocent people, we must begin with the architect of that movement, the man at the center of the Crimson Cyclone. He was born Chandra Mohan Jain in 1931 in a small village in the state of Madhya Pradesh, India. Raised by his maternal grandparents, he was a precocious, rebellious, and intellectually gifted child who questioned every form of authority, from his family's Jain faith to the rigid social structures of his community. He devoured books on philosophy, religion, and politics, and developed into a formidable public speaker and debater, winning a national championship in his university years, while earning a master's degree in philosophy. He claimed to have achieved a profound spiritual enlightenment on March 21, 1953, at the age of 21, an experience he described as a kind of cosmic death and rebirth that dissolved his sense of individual self. For a time he worked as a philosophy professor, but his true calling was on the road. He began traveling throughout India, giving lectures and holding meditation camps, where he launched scathing, eloquent critiques of mainstream religions, socialism, and Mahatma Gandhi, all sacred cows in post-independence India. He adopted the name Acharya Rajneesh, Acharya meaning teacher. His message was a radical, syncretic blend of Eastern mystical traditions like Zen Buddhism, Sufism, and Tantra, combined with insights from Western psychology, particularly from figures like Freud, Jung, and Wilhelm Reich. He developed a controversial practice he called dynamic meditation, a multi-stage cathartic technique that involved chaotic breathing, screaming, violent physical movement, and dance, designed to shatter the ego and release repressed emotions. It was primal, intense, and for many who experienced it, profoundly transformative. His teachings were particularly attractive to Westerners. In the late 1960s and 70s, a wave of young, educated, and often affluent people from Europe and North America were journeying to India, seeking spiritual answers that their own cultures seemed unable to provide. In Rajneesh, they found a guru who spoke their language, both literally and figuratively. He was fluent in English, well-versed in Western philosophy, and offered a spiritual path that did not require renouncing the material world. On the contrary, he preached what came to be known as Zorba the Buddha, a fusion of the earthy, life-affirming spirit of Zorba the Greek with the transcendent consciousness of Gautama Buddha. He taught that wealth was not an obstacle to enlightenment, and that sex was a sacred energy, a doorway to the divine. This was a seductive and liberating message for a generation raised on concepts of original sin and material guilt. By 1974, his following had grown to the point that he established a permanent base, an ashram in the city of Pune. The Pune ashram quickly became a global countercultural phenomenon. Thousands of Western sannyasins, as his disciples were called, flocked to the commune. They would surrender their birth names for new Sanskrit ones, dress in shades of orange, red, and maroon, and wear a mala necklace with a locket containing his photograph. The ashram offered a dizzying array of therapy groups, some of which involved physical aggression and sexual encounters, leading to sensationalist media reports and condemnation from the conservative Indian public. To his followers, he was now Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh. Bhagwan, meaning the Blessed One, or God, an enlightened master who could guide them to liberation. To his detractors, he was a brilliant but manipulative cult leader, the sex guru who was preying on the spiritually vulnerable and amassing a fortune. Among the thousands drawn into Bhagwan's orbit was a young, fiercely intelligent woman named Sheila Ambalal Patel. Born in India in 1949, she had moved to the United States for college, attending Montclair State in New Jersey, where she met and married a young American. But a trip back to India changed the course of her life. She was introduced to Bhagwan and was immediately and completely captivated. She saw in him not just a spiritual teacher, but a source of immense power and purpose. Bhagwan, in turn, recognized her sharp intellect, her boundless ambition, and her unwavering devotion. Sheila quickly became indispensable. She rose through the ranks of the organization with astonishing speed, eventually becoming his personal secretary and most trusted aide. When Bhagwan took a vow of public silence in 1981, ostensibly to commune more deeply with the universe, Sheila became his voice, his messenger, and the de facto CEO of the burgeoning global enterprise. Ma Anand Sheila, as she was now known, was the operational brain and the iron fist to Bhagwan's spiritual heart. By the early 1980s, the Pune ashram was facing immense pressure. The Indian government, under Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, had grown hostile, retroactively revoking the ashram's tax-exempt status and hitting it with a bill for millions of dollars. The organization was also a constant source of controversy and public outrage. Bhagwan, whose health was also deteriorating, decided it was time to leave India and build his long-dreamed-of utopia, a new man's commune where his vision could be realized without outside interference. The search for a new home led them to the United States. In the summer of 1981, operating through a front corporation called the Chadvilas Rajneesh Meditation Center, Sheila negotiated the purchase of the Big Muddy Ranch, a vast 64,229-acre property straddling Wasco and Jefferson counties in central Oregon. It cost them $5.75 million. The land was remote, arid, and had been a spectacular failure for its previous owners. For the Rajneeshis, it was a blank canvas on which they would paint their masterpiece. They named it Rancho Rajneesh, and soon Rajneeshpuram, the city of Rajneesh. The speed and scale of construction at Rajneeshpuram were nothing short of breathtaking. It was a testament to the power of collective faith and highly skilled unpaid labor. Thousands of sannyasins from around the world descended upon the Oregon desert, and in just 3 years transformed the barren landscape into a thriving, self-sufficient city. These were not unskilled laborers. They were architects, civil engineers, doctors, city planners, and farmers who poured their professional expertise into the commune's development. They worked 12-hour days, 7 days a week, fueled by a fervent devotion to Bhagwan's vision. They built 60 miles of roads. They constructed the Gurdjieff Dam to create a 45-acre reservoir for drinking water and irrigation. They built a 4,500-foot paved airstrip, a central bus depot for their fleet of nearly 100 buses, and a sophisticated sewage treatment plant. They cultivated over 1,000 acres of land, creating vast organic farms, greenhouses, a dairy, and a poultry operation that made the city entirely self-sufficient for food. The city itself boasted amenities that rivaled any small town in America. There was a shopping mall with a bookstore and a boutique, a hotel, several restaurants, including a pizzeria and a disco, a post office, a fire department, a town hall, and a school. And everywhere there was the presence of Bhagwan. Despite his public silence, his image was ubiquitous. The centerpiece of the community was Rajneesh Mandir, a massive 2-acre indoor space for meditation and gatherings. Every afternoon, Bhagwan would partake in the drive-by darshan. He would slowly drive one of his 93 Rolls-Royces down the main road of the city as thousands of his red-clad followers lined the streets, chanting, singing, and bowing as he passed. It was their daily moment of connection with their master, a ritual that reinforced the cult of personality at the heart of the entire enterprise. But this grand utopian experiment was unfolding on a collision course with its neighbors. Wasco County was a conservative, deeply traditional rural community, and the arrival of thousands of sannyasins was a profound cultural and political shock. The locals, many of whom were descendants of the original Oregon Trail pioneers, viewed the newcomers with a mixture of fear, suspicion, and contempt. They saw them as a bizarre free love cult, arrogant and secretive, who dressed funny and had strange names. The Rajneeshis, in turn, viewed the locals as ignorant, uncultured bigots who were persecuting them for their religious beliefs. The primary battleground became Oregon's uniquely strict statewide land use laws, designed to protect farmland from urban sprawl. The Rajneeshis had incorporated Rajneeshpuram as a city, claiming the right to urban development. The state of Oregon, urged on by a powerful environmental watchdog group called 1,000 Friends of Oregon, argued that the city was illegal, a violation of laws mandating that the land be used exclusively for agriculture. This legal war, fought in courtrooms and county commission meetings, defined the relationship between the commune and the outside world. To the Rajneeshis, it was an existential threat. They had poured their life savings and years of labor into building their dream city, and now the state was trying to dismantle it. This sense of being under siege fostered a deep and growing paranoia within the community. The feeling was not entirely unfounded. In July 1983, a hotel they had purchased in Portland, the Hotel Rajneesh, was bombed by a radical Islamic militant. No one was killed, but the bomber was seriously injured. The event terrified the sannyasins and provided the justification for a massive military buildup. They created their own police force, the Rajneeshpuram Peace Force, and equipped it with an arsenal of semi-automatic weapons, including Uzi submachine guns and Galil assault rifles, turning their spiritual haven into an armed camp. Ma Anand Sheela was the commander-in-chief in this escalating conflict. Her public persona became increasingly combative and profane. She appeared on local news and national programs like Nightline, verbally sparring with critics and dismissing their concerns with contemptuous arrogance. She famously told an Oregon official, "You can tell the Attorney General to go and get stuffed." Her pugnacity thrilled her followers, who saw her as a fearless warrior defending them from persecution. But to Oregonians, she was the personification of the cult's perceived arrogance and hostility. The political strategy became more aggressive. The first target was the tiny nearby town of Antelope, population 40. In 1982, the Rajneeshis simply moved enough of their own people into the town to outvote the locals, taking over the city council in a special election. They promptly voted to rename the town Rajneesh. It was a ruthless demonstration of their political power. But their true ambition was to seize control of the entire county by winning a majority on the 3-member Wasco County Court in the November 1984 election. Control of the court meant control of land use decisions, which would secure the future of Rajneeshpuram. Their first plan to achieve this was audacious. They would simply import a new electorate. As the crucial November 1984 election approached, Sheela and her inner circle knew they faced a demographic problem. There were simply not enough registered sannyasins to outvote the established residents of Wasco County. Their solution was the Sharia home program. On the surface, it was presented as a profound act of compassion. The commune chartered a fleet of buses and sent them to major cities across the United States: New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, Miami. They brought back approximately 4,000 homeless individuals, promising them food, shelter, clothing, and a new life in their desert utopia. The media was invited to witness this great humanitarian gesture. The hidden agenda, however, was purely political. The plan was to register these thousands of new arrivals to vote in Wasco County, creating an instant, massive voting bloc that would guarantee victory for the 2 Rajneeshi candidates running for the county commission. The program was an immediate and catastrophic failure. The homeless population, many of whom suffered from severe mental illness and substance abuse issues, proved impossible to control. They clashed with the disciplined, work-focused culture of the sannyasins. The commune's resources were strained, and the idyllic atmosphere was shattered by chaos and conflict. To maintain control, commune leaders reportedly began sedating the unruly homeless by putting Haldol, a powerful antipsychotic drug, into their beer. From a political standpoint, the plan was thwarted by the vigilance of Wasco County Clerk Sue Prolapin. Recognizing the blatant attempt at election fraud, she enacted an emergency ordinance requiring that every new voter registrant appear before a justice of the peace to prove they intended to make Wasco County their permanent residence. It became clear that the vast majority of the Sharia home participants would be disqualified. The plan had failed. Within weeks, the commune gave up. They put the homeless back on buses and unceremoniously dumped them in nearby towns, creating a regional crisis. With their demographic strategy in ruins, and the election just weeks away, Sheila's inner circle pivoted to a far more sinister plan. If they could not outvote their opponents, they would make their opponents physically incapable of voting. This marked the turn toward bioterrorism. The plot was conceived and executed by a small, secretive group at the very top of the Rajneeshpuram hierarchy. This cabal included Sheila, Ma Anand Pooja, the nurse who ran the commune's medical clinic and had a background in medical technology, and a handful of other trusted lieutenants. Operating with total secrecy, they set about weaponizing disease. Pooja took the lead. Using the commune's legitimate medical license, she ordered a culture of Salmonella enterica typhimurium from the American Type Culture Collection, a medical supply house in Rockville, Maryland. At the time, such pathogens could be purchased with minimal scrutiny. In a secret laboratory set up inside the medical clinic, Pooja and her team began to cultivate the bacteria. Growing it in large batches, they had their biological agent. Their first experiments were small-scale and targeted. They attempted to poison the water supply of 2 of the 3 incumbent county commissioners. In one instance, a Sannyasine offered a glass of water to Commissioner Jim Comini during a tour of the ranch. He declined. They also reportedly contaminated a water pitcher in his office. These initial efforts failed. They needed a more effective method of mass delivery. They decided that a trial run was necessary to test both the potency of their bacteria and their ability to disseminate it widely and covertly. The Dalles, as the county seat and largest population center, was the perfect laboratory. The plan they devised was as simple as it was evil. They would contaminate the salad bars at local restaurants. Salad bars were the ideal vector. The uncooked food would allow the bacteria to survive and multiply, and the self-service format made it easy for a customer to add a contaminant without being noticed. The team gave their bacterial concoction a code name, Salsa. In late August and early September of 1984, they began preliminary tests. They managed to sicken 2 state investigators who were visiting the ranch by putting the salmonella in their drinking water. The test was a success. Then, from September 9th to October 8th, they launched their full-scale assault on the Dalles. On multiple occasions, teams of sannyasins from the inner circle drove the 18 miles from the ranch to the town. They visited at least 10 different restaurants, from the local Shakey's Pizza and Pizza Hut to the Portage Inn and the Old Taco Time. One member of the team would stand watch while another would walk up to the salad bar and discreetly sprinkle or pour the brownish, salmonella-laden liquid onto the lettuce, the 3-bean salad, the blue cheese dressing. Then they would calmly pay for tea, air meal and leave. They were ghosts, hiding in plain sight. They returned to the ranch and waited to see the results of their handiwork on the evening news. The devastating outbreak that followed confirmed the success of their trial run. As news reports detailed the hundreds of sick residents and the overwhelmed hospital, the plotters at Rajneeshpuram knew they possessed a powerful weapon. Their plan was to store what they had learned, and then, in the days immediately preceding the November 6th election, launch a second, even larger attack. This time, they would target not just salad bars, but produce in grocery stores, and perhaps even the city's primary water reservoir, ensuring that on election day, a significant portion of the town's population would be too violently ill to make it to the polls. The path to political power, they believed, now ran through the hospital emergency room. The scientific investigation launched by the CDC was a model of methodical deduction, but it was running against a psychological current, of sheer disbelief, Dr. Thomas Torek, one of the lead CDC investigators on the ground, recalled how the data relentlessly pointed away from an accidental contamination. For a single rare strain of salmonella to spontaneously appear in 10 different restaurants across a wide variety of different food items on their salad bars defied all statistical probability. It was, as one expert put it, a microbiological smoking gun. This was a point source epidemic with multiple points. The only explanation that fit the data was a deliberate malicious act, and in Wasco County in 1984, there was only one group with the motive, the means, and the perceived malevolence to carry out such an attack: the Rajneeshpuram. Local residents and police had been saying it from the start, but their suspicions were dismissed by many as paranoia and prejudice. Now the science was backing them up. However, scientific certainty is not the same as legal proof. While the epidemiologists were convinced it was a deliberate act, the law enforcement investigation hit a brick wall. There were no eyewitnesses who had seen the contamination. There was no physical evidence, no vials, no lab equipment linking the commune to the bacteria. The FBI was initially hesitant to take the lead. In 1984, domestic bioterrorism was not a clearly defined federal crime. There was no precedent, no established protocol for such an investigation. Was it attempted murder, a state crime, or was it something else? The jurisdictional lines were blurry. The Rajneeshpuram, for their part, mounted a vigorous public relations defense. Sheila went on television and vehemently denied any involvement, calling the accusations a bunch of lies and portraying the commune as the victim of a witch hunt. Without a confession or an inside informant, the investigation stalled. The election came and went in a surprise move, likely because the Sharia home program had failed so spectacularly, and they feared a massive backlash at the polls. The Rajneeshpuram candidates withdrew their names from the ballot. With the immediate political threat gone, the urgency of the investigation seemed to fade. The sick recovered. Life in the Dalles slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy, and the case grew cold. For a full year, the largest bioterror attack in American history remained an officially unsolved public health mystery, a dark cloud of unanswered questions hanging over the small Oregon town. The truth would only be revealed when the utopian facade of Rajneeshpuram finally cracked and the entire edifice came crashing down. The undoing of Rajneeshpuram was not the result of external pressure, but of internal rot. The catalyst was a titanic power struggle between its two central figures, Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh and Ma Anand Sheila. By the summer of 1985, Bhagwan had grown weary of his self-imposed silence and increasingly resentful of Sheila's immense power. She controlled every aspect of the commune: the finances, the legal strategy, the daily lives of the sannyasins. She was the queen, and he, it seemed, had become a figurehead, a prisoner in his own kingdom. He also began to suspect that her cabal was responsible for a string of crimes that even he could not condone, including a plot to murder his personal physician. The guru decided it was time to reclaim his throne. On September 14, 1985, Sheila, sensing her imminent downfall, abruptly fled the commune with a handful of her closest allies, including Ma Anand Puja. They flew to Europe, taking with them, it was alleged, a large sum of the commune's money. 2 days later, on September 16th, Bhagwan broke his 4-year vow of silence. He called a press conference and, in a soft, lilting voice, unleashed a torrent of accusations against the woman who had been his most devoted disciple. He called her a perfect bitch and a fascist. He accused her and her gang of a staggering array of crimes committed not against outsiders, but against his own people, a massive wiretapping operation that spied on everyone, including himself, a fire that destroyed the county planning office, and multiple attempted murders. Crucially, he did not mention the Salmonella attack. It's a matter of debate whether he knew about it at the time, or if he was strategically omitting it. Then, Bhagwan made a fateful decision. In an effort to clean house and pin the commune's crimes squarely on the departed Sheila, he invited state and federal law enforcement to come to the ranch and investigate. For Oregon law enforcement, who had been stonewalled by the commune for years, this was the moment they had been waiting for. The gates of the fortress were suddenly thrown open. What they discovered inside was a criminal conspiracy far more extensive than they had ever imagined. They found evidence of the massive wiretapping operation. They found secret caches of illegal weapons, and they found the bioterrorism lab. Tipped off by disillusioned sannyasins, investigators located the hidden room in the medical clinic. Inside, they found glassware, incubators, and medical literature on bacteriological warfare. And on a shelf, they found a small vial containing a sample of bacteria. The FBI lab in Washington confirmed it was Salmonella enterica typhimurium, a precise genetic match to the strain that had poisoned the Dalles. They had found the smoking gun. The discovery of the lab broke the dam of silence. Sannyasins, now free from Sheila's intimidating presence and eager to curry favor with Bhagwan and the authorities, began to talk. David Barry Knapp, the Rajneeshpuram mayor of the city, became a key witness for the government, providing a detailed insider's account of the criminal plots. Others from Sheila's inner circle, facing long prison sentences, also chose to cooperate. They laid out the entire bioterrorism plot for investigators. The motive, the acquisition of the bacteria, the test runs, and the chilling, systematic contamination of the 10 salad bars. The full, horrifying truth was finally out. With indictments imminent, both Sheila and Bhagwan became international fugitives. In October 1985, Sheila and Pooja were arrested by Interpol in West Germany. They fought extradition for months, but were eventually returned to the United States to face charges. At the same time, Bhagwan, realizing his gambit had backfired, and that he was now the target of a federal investigation, decided to flee. On October 27, 1985, he and a small entourage boarded a chartered Learjet packed with cash, jewels, and a diamond-studded watch, and took off in the middle of the night. But federal agents were tracking the plane. When it landed to refuel in Charlotte, North Carolina, U.S. Marshals surrounded the aircraft and arrested the guru. He was charged not with the poisoning, but with 35 counts of immigration fraud for arranging thousands of sham marriages to keep his foreign disciples in the country. The legal fallout was swift and, for many, deeply unsatisfying. Facing a mountain of evidence and a long, complex trial, Ma Anand Sheila and Ma Anand Pooja pleaded guilty to a range of charges, including assault for the poisonings and wiretapping. Sheila was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison. However, she served just 29 months in a minimum security facility before being granted parole and deported. She eventually settled in Switzerland, where she continues to live, having shown little public remorse for her role in the attack. Bhagwan, always pragmatic, also took a deal. He entered an Alford plea to 2 felony immigration charges, a legal maneuver that allowed him to maintain his innocence while conceding the state had enough evidence to convict him. He was given a 10-year suspended sentence, fined $400,000, and deported from the United States, barred from returning for 5 years. He returned to Pune, rebranded himself as Osho, and died in 1990. Without its charismatic leader and its iron-fisted administrator, Rajneeshpuram collapsed almost overnight. The sannyasins dispersed. The fleet of Rolls-Royces was sold off, and the land was eventually sold at auction to pay the commune's massive debts. The grand utopian city in the desert was abandoned, left to crumble back into the dust. The anatomy of the Rajneeshpuram bioterror plot is a disturbing dissection of the pathologies that can flourish within closed, high-demand groups. The psychological anatomy reveals a textbook case of charismatic leadership and coercive persuasion. Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh, whether he directly ordered the crimes or not, created the conditions for them to occur. He fostered an environment of absolute devotion and a worldview that placed the group and its mission above all external laws and moral codes. He created a vacuum of accountability, which was filled by Ma Anand Sheila's ruthless pragmatism. For the followers who participated, their actions were likely justified through a process of moral disengagement, fueled by a powerful in-group-out-group dynamic. The people of the Dalles were not seen as fellow human beings, but as the enemy, an obstacle to the realization of their enlightened utopia, making them legitimate targets. The investigative anatomy of this case is equally compelling, primarily because it was solved not by brilliant detective work, but by the conspirators' own hubris and internal collapse. For a full year, despite strong suspicions and compelling epidemiological data, the case was cold. Law enforcement was stymied by the commune's wall of silence. The critical breakthrough came only when the power struggle between Bhagwan and Sheila erupted, leading the guru to invite the police into his sanctuary. It is a stark illustration of how the most potent vulnerabilities of secretive criminal organizations are often not external pressures, but the inherent instabilities of human relationships, ego, jealousy, and the desire for self-preservation. It was the human element, not the forensic one, that ultimately cracked the case. Finally, there is the historical anatomy of the event as a watershed moment in domestic terrorism. This was the first, and remains the largest, bioterrorist attack in United States history. It was a chilling demonstration of the terrifying accessibility of biological weapons. The plot required no state sponsorship, no sophisticated missile technology, and no billion-dollar budget. It required only a commercially available pathogen, a modest amount of scientific knowledge possessed by a nurse, and a fanatical ideology that sanctioned mass violence. The attack was a profound warning of a new type of threat, a vulnerability at the intersection of fanaticism and modern science. Yet the warning was largely ignored. The event was often treated as a bizarre, anomalous footnote in the strange history of new religious movements, rather than as a dire national security precedent. It would take the anthrax letters in the wake of the September 11th attacks, nearly 2 decades later, for the nation to fully awaken to the threat that had first materialized on the salad bars of a small town in Oregon. The story of Rajneeshpuram is a profound and unsettling cautionary tale. It reveals the terrifying speed with which idealism can decay into extremism, and how the noble pursuit of a better world can become the justification for the most profane of actions. It demonstrates that the path to utopia can sometimes lead through a laboratory where devoted hands cultivate not enlightenment, but disease. The most terrifying poison that came from Rajneeshpuram was not the salmonella they cultured in a lab, but the fanaticism they nurtured in the human heart. This has been Anatomy of Crime, where the truth is never simple, but always worth seeking.